everybody, and welcome. You're all very welcome to. I think this is our fourth in our spring webinar series 2026. I'm delighted to be here with you today to present smart financial planning for women. Sarah, we've been inundated with requests and registrations. I think this is
We
our
really have.
biggest webinar
Biggest
ever.
biggest ever webinar, Ellen. As you said, we've been
Mm.
doing them for a few years now, so it's great to see so many women on the call now today. So you're very welcome.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and it just goes to show the interest that's out there, and I suppose the want and the need for information. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think we've over 600 registrations so far, which is amazing, and it's a great testament to you guys sitting here today, seeking out that information, and hopefully start the plan to putting yourself in a better financial position. So look, we'll get cracking. I'm cognizant that it's lunchtime, and I'm cognizant that we have, I suppose, a little window here before you all have to go back to work. But look, International Women's Day, this originated, folks, in the early 20th century, as you all know, and it was a global movement to promote women's rights, equality and suffrage, and it's celebrated annually every year on March the 8th. So as a company, IPF felt this was a really good opportunity to take stock and really focus on why International Women's Day is a reminder for all of us of the potential financial gaps that persist between men and women surrounding these topics. These gaps, and we're going to get into a really robust discussion today, they're often rooted in differences in earnings, pensions, career breaks and investing habits, and they can accumulate for all of us over a lifetime. And what that kind of compound effect over a lifetime can have a major impact the other side. So look, we as women, we often face barriers that affect our long-term earning potential, such as career breaks, part-time work, caring responsibilities and health changes. So we're going to get into, I suppose, a good discussion as to the why, and what we can do to mitigate against these gaps that still exist, even though we've come on leaps and bounds over the last couple of decades. But there still is a significant gap, and this is something we really want to highlight with you today. What better time to create this awareness around International Women's Day? So look, just the agenda for today, folks. We're going to try and keep it within the hour, Sarah.
Yes, absolutely.
And we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions. We definitely won't get through all of them today. I will try and answer as many as I can throughout the content of the webinar. But you will probably find that we do answer a lot of them as we go through the slide deck. So once we get through the slide deck, we're going to have a competition. And it's a €100 one for all voucher. So keep those eyes peeled. The question that we're going to be asking at the end will be included at some part in the slide deck, and it's fastest fingers first, Sarah. So whoever gets in with the first correct answer wins the €100 one for all voucher. We're also going to open up the chat function at different points within the webinar. We'll let you know when we do. And then like that, in terms of questions, we're going to try and get through as many of them as we can based on what was sent in to us. So I want to introduce you, I suppose, to Sarah Connolly, who is our marketing manager and leads a wonderful team in IPF, and has been at the helm of this project and all of the webinars and the content and the organisation. And as I said on the retirement webinar, IPF would fall down if we didn't have Sarah Connolly at the helm. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all the hard work.
Thanks, Ellen.
And then we have our guest speaker, Michelle Farrelly. Michelle Farrelly is one of our top senior financial planners within IPF, and we've worked very closely for years, Michelle. And very, very proud of the work that Michelle does. So Michelle, you're with us since 2018.
Yes, can you believe it's been a long while now? Feels like it was yesterday. So it's
It
been that
does.
long we've been working together, Ellen. Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose, Michelle, knowing what you know now from when you kind of your day one, what have you learned, I suppose, as a woman specifically working within IPF?
Like, I suppose that the strength in, I suppose, us as women and decision makers, and be able to kind of empower ourselves to put ourselves in a good position, but also I think the power of looking at these things early. I think that's a really big message and a really strong message that we're going to kind of hopefully get through today, is that, look, this is just step one. But the earlier that you kind of have a look at these things and you inform yourself and you position yourself in a place that you can make those informed decisions, the better position you're going to be in.
Yeah.
overall in the future.
Absolutely. And Michelle, looking at you as an example, an isolated example within Irish Pensions and Finance, came in 2018, and you've climbed your own career path, your own individual career path, and is one of our go-to people within the company. So a really, really good example for junior members of staff, and a good female leader in the company. So, delighted to have you on board today. Fun fact about Michelle. Michelle, you're fluent as Gaeilge.
I am Díomh go léir chuirde agus lá idir náisiúnta banana man Hilligh go léir.
So it's being shot in the Gaeilge this week and next. We should really repeat this as Gaeilge next week, Michelle. What do you think?
Give me a chance. Let me get through it in English first. Give me a chance. We'll see. We'll get subtitles, I think, along the way.
That's it. Exactly. I'll have to dust off my old Leaving Cert Irish book and see how we go. But look, folks, for those of you that don't know who we are, and I know we've a lot of existing clients on the call here today, and delighted to see so many familiar names. For those of you that are new to us, Irish Pensions and Finance, we're 100% Irish-owned brokerage. We're based out in Bracetown in Clonee. Really, really proud of the fact that, we have grown since 1993 from a staff of 3 to 4, Sarah, and we've over 120 employees now, and we're really, really proud of the fact that, we've organically grown within the Irish market. We've carved out, I suppose, a really important part of public sector financial advice through our payroll facilitated AVC schemes, which would cover a range of, the houses of the Oireachtas, HSE, voluntary hospitals, county councils, civil service, the guards. It's kind of your general public sector umbrella. And it is a facility for any public sector worker, should they need to augment or boost their main scheme benefits. And this is particularly important, I suppose, if it's a case that for anyone sitting here today, or any of our clients that feel that what they're on track to receive, they're running short and they're falling behind in terms of what they'd like to see for themselves in retirement and the pathway towards retirement. We have a team of 70 plus financial advisors, again, which, we bring in from a very kind of junior position and train organically, internally, and support education. So really, really proud of the team that we have within IPF. And these are the team members, folks, that should you move forward towards your own financial review, you will be sitting with one of these experts in public sector benefits that can try and give you the right advice to the best of their ability. We have over 30,000 clients. Some of you are here today, and that's climbing every day. And we've 1 billion in funds under management. So it was a real milestone for us, particularly for a company that's grown from such a small size organically up to this level of this level and size of a company. So really, really proud of that. No surprise that 67% of our clients are female. And we see this day in, day out, Michelle, and we're going to get into the why, I suppose, in the content of the webinar, that we do see these gaps every day when we're conducting financial reviews with clients, and all sorts of potential gaps, such as maternity leave, taking time out to raise families, early retirement, coming in late, and we're going to get into the content, but it does have an impact. And I suppose 67% of our clients taking action to mitigate against those gaps. And again, really proud of this fact, 61% of IPF staff are female. So again, very, very proud of that stat. Just to say, our CEO is female, Claire Hanrahan. Our COO is also female, Carol Crahan, and our CFO is female, Blahi. And 5 out of the 8 on senior management team are female. So again, we're putting our money where our mouth is, folks, but we're really, really proud of the fact. Okay, enough about us. Let's move forward, Sarah. Our 3 key objectives today. So look, number 1, why is financial planning important for women? So we're going to, I suppose, get into the challenges that we all can face, from a financial point of view, and tie that in with, I suppose, the gender pay gap. And then, I suppose, something that's not spoken about as much, which would be the gender pension gap and then the gender investment gap. Tune into, I suppose, your own goals for your financial future. So anybody that's sitting here today, what is it you'd like to see happen for yourself? And, we will then match that with, your current situation. What is your foundation? Where do you want to see yourself? What is your growth area in terms of your own financial security? And then number three, what options are available to you to help you achieve these goals? How can we plan, mitigate against those shortfalls, and tackle those areas that you're worried about, and put those key solutions in place? We have this QR code here, folks. So look, I would advise everyone on the call, scan that. You definitely, most definitely will get that light bulb moment during the content of the webinar. So I would advise you all, whip the phone out, scan that QR code. That will bring you straight through to a pre-appointment questionnaire, and then we will advise everybody to have a 5-minute screening call with a qualified financial advisor. Okay, brilliant. So look, moving on, we're going to open up the chat function here, folks, and this is just, I suppose, to get the minds working a little bit. Why is financial planning important? So look, what is the current average life expectancy for women in Ireland? Brilliant. So we have 82, 80, 86, 84, 82, 86, 84, 86, 84.
Got you all quick off the mark.
80. Oh, very quick off the mark,
They don't.
absolutely. 84, 84. And our survey says, Sarah, it's
84.
actually 84. Excellent. So what does that tell us, folks? I suppose, look, we all know that we're an aging population, and I suppose in terms of, you know, the pressures that are going to be on the pension system, we are living longer. And I suppose in terms of the support system that's in place, for every 5 people working, there's 1 retiree currently. Fast forward 20, 30 years, that is down to 2 to 1. So we're living longer, but there's less people supporting us in terms of our pension. Our average life expectancy, so on average, women spend 3 more years in retirement, often facing a 20-year retirement period compared to 17 years for men. So what does that tell us? We're living longer, we have reduced pension benefits, but we have to plan for longer. So again, let's look at this, let's have a serious conversation around this, and let's look at how we can mitigate against this. Okay. In terms of financial planning, why is this important? What percentage of women in Ireland find themselves in poverty in later life? 20%, 12, 12, 16, 20, 16, 20, 20, 16, 12, 16, 20, 12, 20. And our survey says, Sarah?
16%.
16%. This was a stat that I wasn't aware of up until we went to our pension summit in Croke Park post-Christmas. And it actually jolted me into a sense of reality around the stark differences that are in place. There's a very good paper, folks, the Retirement Living Standard paper, and this states that we as women are 50% more likely to end up in poverty than men in retirement. So I suppose, look, what does that tell us? The average old age poverty rate for women across the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, highlighting that women are at greater risk of poverty in later life. The findings are startling, and there's 4 interconnected gaps that leave women financially exposed. You know, and that's not to say we don't have time and we can't mitigate against them. Yes, we can, but it's to create an awareness around it. So we have our gender pension gap, which we're going to speak around, Michelle. It's our advice gap, our knowledge gap, and our financial confidence gap. They're huge implications across the board. So look, this is the current situation in Ireland. Despite this shrinking over the years, it's still quite significant. We have a 22% gender pay gap. More startling is the gender pension gap, which runs at 36%. What's your view on this, Michelle, I suppose, in your experience working in the industry?
Yeah, like it's quite startling, I think, especially when you hear words, extreme words like the word poverty, and I suppose what impact that has in such a developed country. I think, look, these stats are really, they're telling us a couple of things. They're telling us, look, women, we're living longer. We have a lot more to contest against versus our male counterparts. We're living longer with less money, which means we need to make it stretch an awful lot longer. Okay, so I suppose that's a really big piece, is that we're already on the back foot. But it's also telling us that, look, the pay gap is not a short-term issue. It's not just a short-term issue. And I suppose we really speak about the today, the here and the now, and the differences in terms of the pay gap and the pay income gap now. But looking at the long term, implications of that in the future and the financial consequences of that pay gap now and how they actually follow us into retirement. I suppose that's where we really see those figures increasing and that stark gap increasing then up from where the numbers are just getting larger and larger. So look, I was like yourself, I was quite shocked to see the figures when they actually put numbers in place. But I suppose the resounding thing is just to be aware of it. And I suppose like ourselves, until you're aware of it, it's very hard to take action on it. And I suppose today is the first step really, and just look, being aware and being able to put a plan in place.
That's it. And it's like with everything, like on a financial review, it's look at the current situation and then look at the solution. Where do we want to be? How do we mitigate against it? And very often, it's very small things that have a really large compound effect over time. It's like maybe taking some time out of work, maybe not making the decision to put plans in place around pension planning, and that all can compound really quickly over time, and then it has a dramatic effect on our circumstances when we get to retirement. So I suppose moving on then, Sarah, this one again, the gender pay gap means women would need around 8 extra years to reach pension parity with men. So again, look, Michelle, Geraldine from the ATU is asking, look, want to retire at 60, how to make the most of ARFs, which is our approved retirement fund vehicle, and have good monthly income. Mary from the HSC is asking how long in advance to plan for monthly income. What do I need to include? I mean, what is this slide telling us?
Yeah, like absolutely. Look, and I suppose we are going to speak and dive a little bit deeper into this as we go through. I suppose looking at that pension number and actually putting a figure on what we need and when we need to start looking at these bits. But I think the general answer is it's a resounding same answer. Look, it's just looking at it early. Look at it, see where you are, position yourself where you're armed with the knowledge and the information.
Yeah.
I suppose looking at this stat in particular, I can only speak for myself, my own clients, I suppose, when I look at this, but looking at your goals and your own personal goals. I know for most of my clients that working on longer, 8 years, 2 years, 3 years, any longer than they have to is not aligned with most people that I speak to in their retirement goals. So anything that we can do and the earlier we can do that to help mitigate that, look, the better.
Okay. Then I suppose again we spoke about the compound effect of all these factors. If we move on to the next slide, compounded with the fact that we need around 8 extra years to reach pension parity. Compounding this is the average time in Ireland that women spend out of the workforce. So women are more likely than men to take time out to have children or after maternity raise a family. So as we were saying, Michelle, 60% of our staff are female. We have women in and out of work all the time on maternity leave, including myself, and very well supported, I have to say. But in terms of the impact to future planning, because I suppose it's looking at that parental leave, paternity leave. There is a slight rebalancing of the scale at the minute, but by and large women are doing the lion's share of leave and it falls
Yeah.
to the female, and women shoulder that unpaid role through those caring roles. So
Yeah.
that's something we see all the time, Michelle, isn't it?
Absolutely. I don't think that will come as much of a surprise to any people on the call today. I suppose that we are taking on the brunt and the backload of the that caring role. So it's a bit of a hangover, I suppose, from a systemic issue maybe from years previous. And we are making strides and we are making waves in terms of rebalancing the scales. But unfortunately, it's just something we have to combat now. And I suppose having those resources available to you,
Yeah.
look, it's only a good thing to be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, and like we do, like in terms of our client bank and in terms of the women we talk to every single day, a lot of their shortfalls will come from reduced hours and part-time work,
Absolutely.
and women are 3 times more likely to work part-time than men. And everything
Yeah.
eats into your service over time, particularly
And
in the
I
public sector.
And I think what's really important to know as well for all of you here on the call today, I suppose there's more times I speak to people and said, I hear it all the time. My situation is complicated. I've gaps everywhere. You won't be able to get your head around it. Like we've been doing this years. We've seen all sorts of breakages in service, chopping and changing, shorter working years, part-time, job share, the whole lot. Look, it's really, really, really common. And I suppose it's probably more often than not that this is one of the main reasons why women sit down, why they want to have a look at a plan and why they want to put structures in place. So for what it's worth, I suppose to know you're not alone in these shortfalls and these gaps, this really is a major thing that we see quite often, and we're really well equipped to be able to offer solutions around that. I suppose we've got the tried and tested solutions there, and we're
Yeah.
doing this every day. So look, some solace in that, I think, for anybody who thinks their situation is maybe too complicated. I can guarantee it's not.
Yeah, and what's really encouraging, Michelle, and what I've noticed, so I'm 16 years in IPF, I've seen a huge surge in employers' engagement in creating awareness and education around these issues, particularly for women. I've seen, lots and lots of webinars around, I suppose,
Mm,
menopause awareness, how that can impact you in the workplace, shortfalls in service, women working part-time. I think it's amazing that employers are really taking ownership and advocating for
absolutely.
this to support women in the workplace.
Absolutely. It's a lot more proactive, I think, than a reactive response. And I suppose I speak a bit about that later on, but I think this is really empowering to see women in these positions who are now being able to actively make these decisions and have a plan before they make the decisions, as opposed to coming on the other end of it where these decisions have already been made and now we're kind of on the back foot firefighting to decisions that we've made previously. So absolutely, I think employers supporting that has just really opened the gates for people to be able to navigate their lifestyles and to achieve these goals that they have for themselves, whatever that may be from a
Yeah.
working capacity.
Yeah, and look, we for sure have come a long way from, the historic issues around women leaving the workforce once they were married within the civil service. So,
Yeah,
we're a million miles away, but that still does have a hangover effect today.
absolutely.
And the impact and diminished pension entitlements for some women. So again, it's just being cognizant of your own situation and what is going to impact you, what is the current situation. If we move on, I suppose, to why does the gap exist, sorry Sarah, Mary from the HSC is asking, why are women penalised for taking maternity leave? It leaves us years behind men. And I suppose, look, any unpaid leave or anything that you take outside of the normal statutory maternity leave, unfortunately, is not accounted towards your service, Michelle.
No, no, and look, and I suppose it's really important to note that as well. I suppose that's a piece that we find towards the kind of final stages of planning for retirement, where people maybe aren't aware of what impact it does have. Look, unfortunately, I suppose it's not a blanket rule for women. It does apply across the board, but as we've seen earlier on, I suppose the hangover is that women take the brunt of that role. And as such, I suppose that's where the hangover and why it exists is that we take on that role a lot more often than men do. I suppose you can see the stats there
Yeah.
from a caring point of view, 445,000 by comparison to 9,000 men taking on a similar role. And that might be for caring for elderly parents or children or any members of their family over the long term. So yeah, look, I suppose it's a thing that exists. It's something that I suppose we just need to manage. We can
Yeah.
manage locally, we can manage at a high level. And I suppose, yeah, look, it's unfortunate, but it's something that we're working towards.
Yeah, and another interesting stat, I suppose, Michelle, would be what is the current average age for mothers giving birth
Yes.
in Ireland? Is 33.3 years. So that
Yeah,
definitely has increased
absolutely.
from,
And look, this stat, like this jumps out to me. I suppose I'm 34 at the moment, so this I'm right in and around this age group, and I suppose look for many women, and I see this with my friends, my peers, my colleagues, and my clients. I suppose it's around this point is exactly where you find a lot of people taking maternity leaves,
yeah,
changes in their working patterns, accommodating childcare needs. This all has an impact on your earnings, and then I suppose the time that you spend in the workforce. And as you said, look, even relatively short periods of career breaks that compound impact over the long term. So I
yeah,
suppose this is probably one of the key reasons why we're finding this gap is emerging over time. And I suppose it's at a point where really we're, I suppose, seen as maybe established in our careers, where really things are starting to take off at this point,
yeah.
and then we find a halt for these reasons. So yeah, look, it's a big thing that we're up against, and it's a big thing that we see that we're kind of handling on a daily basis.
It's a very interesting fact, and it's something really that I hadn't given a huge amount of thought before. You speak around taking time out, reduced working hours, maternity leaves, and all of that, but it's the peak employment opportunities is huge. So
Absolutely.
because we're having babies later in life, typically we're at a really good phase in our working
Yeah.
life. We've climbed the ladder a little bit, promotion opportunities, etc. Um, and that can actually just be stagnant. We're
Yeah.
taking time out of the workplace and we're coming back and our counterparts have progressed. That can have an impact on pension provisions as well, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I suppose this is, again, the message that is, I think, the same within all of these slides as we go through them. And I think knowing it, as it's just knowledge is power, knowledge is key, understanding that these barriers are there and that the obstacles are there. And look, having that provision in place and looking at things early. If you are planning for a family, if you're planning for time off, if you want to go traveling, if you want those breaks, to just have something set in stone before you go. And I think that's really, I suppose, the best message I could give to anybody.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I was reading a report. It was a report done in 2024, a couple of years ago, by the Department of History in Maynooth, and particularly tuning into the impact of those, women leaving the workforce. But presently in the Irish civil service, according to this report, men are twice as likely as women to occupy senior grades, and
Yeah,
all of this has an indirect impact on each other, I suppose.
100%. Yeah.
So look, what is the result? Where does that lead us as women? We're entitled to take career breaks. We unpaid maternity leave after our 6 months statutory mat leave. Part-time work. We see this all the time, Michelle, even if it's not,
All the time.
half time. It could be 3-day week, 4-day week, reduced
Yeah.
hours. And then, as we said earlier, typically women are shouldering those unpaid positions as carers for
Hmm.
parents or children in the home, etc. Job sharing, joining service late, coming from private sector into the public sector, or vice versa, or putting careers off and then joining at a later stage. And the big one we see, Michelle, which again has that compound effect, is wanting the opportunity to retire early.
Absolutely. And why shouldn't we want it? Absolutely. If I had the chance, I'd be gone as soon as I can as well. But look, I suppose another point on these, and absolutely, look, we see the impacts and the results of all of these. I suppose the reasons why we have these shortfalls and the compound impacts of why we have these gaps. But I suppose these opportunities that you have as part of the public sector, they are excellent opportunities that a lot of members of maybe the private sector can't avail of.
Yeah.
So it's not to say, look, these things are a bad thing. They are brilliant and they can be an excellent resource where needed and where required and where to fit into your lifestyle. Um, I said all it is just to plan around it, and that is really it. And I know I keep saying the same thing, but I suppose planning is really what we're all here to do today, is to have a look at what we can do to have the lifestyle that we want now and also in the future. And looking at it early, that's really what's going to help that.
That's it, exactly. So again, identify where we're falling short. There's other challenges we haven't spoken about. Again, Michelle, and this was a hot topic at the Pension Summit in Crow Park, and really insightful information. This was kind of research and feedback we received from Julia Lynn, who's a pensions regulator, and she was reporting on women in general were more risk averse. So again, this is back to those systemic issues that we're less likely to take a chance on higher risk profiles in
Yeah.
terms of pensions or investment, and that's just our nature. And then losing out on that compounding growth, and compounding effects are huge here today, because there's little things over
Yeah,
a long period of time
exactly.
has a dramatic effect. So if we're going slightly less risky road than somebody that has a slightly higher appetite for risk, we're losing out on all that compounding growth over time. Um, Lower financial confidence. This was huge. And again, the reporting was that confidence gap. 29% of women feel less confident in making investment decisions
Yeah.
versus 53% in men. So that's another startling fact. And then the advice gap, compounded with that, would be that 1 in 5, 20% believe financial advice is more targeted at men than women. And 60,
Not today.
that's today.
No,
Um,
not today. Said today now we're all about the women.
we're all about the women, but this was kind of reporting done this year. So again,
Yeah.
it's that confidence to, make their own financial decisions. Stress and anxiety linked with finance, so uncertainty around what they have, what benefits are in place. So again, today is brilliant that we see such a high interest and levels of engagement, because this is the first step to finding out what is the current situation, what do we need to be thinking about, and getting in that zone to make your own key decisions. And then gaps in service during peak times in career was one of the main points that Julia Lynn pointed out. So again, back to that maternity leave, carers leave. But also, she made an interesting point, for us as women, to, not be putting things on the long finger, to engage earlier and call to action earlier to mitigate against those shortfalls. What's your experience around that, Michelle?
Yeah, look, and again, I think a lot of the slides as we're kind of going to go through will really enforce that message. And I think, look, it's timing. It's looking at this, and the longer you have to plan, the less it takes, the less of a burden it is. I suppose you can chip away at these things and looking at anything on a high level and trying to take everything in one go, it can be very overwhelming. And I suppose that can also lend to stress and anxiety around putting a plan in place. But just chipping away little and often, you'd be surprised what you can achieve over a long period of time. So absolutely, look, the earlier you look at this again, it also, look, the earlier you look at this, you might identify there's no problems. And even that in
That's,
itself, that's empowering. So I
yeah,
suppose just to see where you are and find out, do I need to take action? Is there a call for action or is what I'm doing enough? And often the case, it might be, it very may well be, I suppose, but that confidence and knowing that you've got that second opinion to say, yeah, look, what you're doing is okay,
yeah.
can be enough to get you where you need to be.
And that's it. And in my experience, and I know just kind of talking to my friends and my sisters, etc., and knowing that, when you leave work, you close the laptop and you go home, you're at the bottom of the pile in terms of priority because, you're managing the house and the kids and activities and all of that. And sometimes we are at the bottom of the pile, but it is useful. Take that time out, look after yourself, take the time out to find out the why, see where the issues are, and prioritize yourself. So, speaking of which, so we've looked at all potential challenges, why there is the pension gap, the gender gap, the investment gap, the advice gap, financial planning. How can
Yeah.
this help, Michelle?
So look, I suppose firstly, it can help by really just simplifying everything. Okay. So look, financial planning, all it is an organized way of just managing your money to firstly help you to set those goals. So some of you may already have financial goals. Maybe you don't have financial goals. Maybe it's the first time you've ever considered it, but sitting down and putting a plan in place is the first step.
Yeah,
The second thing it allows you to do is to be able to achieve these goals over a short, a medium, and a long-term strategy. Okay. Because as we all know, life is going to change. Okay. The plans we have today are not going to be the same plans we have in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, and so on and so forth. Okay.
yeah,
But I suppose, like any task or job that needs to be doing or that needs doing, it can be really daunting. And I suppose that's probably what lends to the stress or the anxiety when we speak about financial planning and why I suppose we find that gap in people taking advice. And that can be the case when you
yeah,
don't have a plan.
yeah,
Okay. So I suppose, look, what it usually involves is taking a couple of different key areas that we can see. So looking at maybe retirement planning, looking at your savings, looking at protection, looking at investments, but not looking at them all together.
oh,
Okay. And I think that's the really important piece is that looking at it and taking one at a time, taking advice. Okay. And I suppose, look, that's where a financial planner's job steps in. That's where we put our hat on. And I suppose that's what we are here to do is to help you navigate through each of these different key areas.
yeah,
And I suppose really what it can help you do is just to be really intentional with your money and with your finances. And like I mentioned earlier on, I suppose with not being reactive to situations, I suppose having that proactive approach to understanding that in the short, the medium, or in the long term, that we have all of our ducks in a row. And I suppose the end result is that you've got financial independence. And I think that's really what we're all striving for
yeah.
over the period of time is just being able to make those decisions on your own terms and on your own grounds.
Yeah, and I think what I come across is kind of, I suppose, it's the mystery of financial planning. So if we
Yeah,
take it back a step and go, right, what is a goal? A goal could be I want to top up my pension because I want to retire at 60 and I want to have a nice lifestyle. A goal could be I'm saving for a house, so I need to build up a deposit.
absolutely.
A goal could be I've inherited a lump of money and it's sitting in the bank and it's not making anything and I want to explore my options. A goal could be I've 4 kids under 6 and I need to make sure I have a college fund in 15 years.
Absolutely.
So it's you're totally right, Michelle. One step at a time and
Yeah,
one piece of the puzzle at a time. And
absolutely.
ideally, it's kind of ticking those boxes and isolating where you're worried and where you're not.
And that's
Um,
it. And step one, as I said, sometimes just setting the goal is a good enough job for meeting one. Even just
yes,
laying them out, putting them on paper, and actually just establishing what it is we're trying to do before taking action on it then.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like Angela is sent in a question from Meath Co. She's asking, "What's the best way to protect and plan for the future?" I couldn't have put it better myself, and it's so true. It's just protect what
Yeah,
you have now, but
yeah,
plan your savings,
100%.
plan your retirement, plan what it is you want. Be it buy a house, go on holiday, etc. But look, I think this is great. First step is with the webinar here today. Our second step in the process would be everybody here. I would really strongly encourage
Yeah,
you, click on that QR code, book in for the 5 minute screening call with an advisor. They'll tell you very quickly whether you need to move
yeah,
forward for a financial review. And then if you're worried, there is a solution. And as Michelle said,
absolutely.
the solution could be do nothing. You're fine,
Oh, absolutely.
So
And we find as well, I think those 5 minute screening calls, because I think it's a big thing like that as women, we wear so many hats, we are so busy. And I think probably finding time to actually sit down and to put a plan in place can be
yeah,
something that we struggle with. And even that 5 minute screening call, that conversation with somebody just to map out, do I really need to sit down for these 45 minutes to an hour? Once a year, that could be the best 45 minutes to an hour you take in your whole
absolutely.
life to get you exactly where you need to be. So I think, yes, absolutely. If we stress nothing else today, take the 5 minutes, go through the call, see where you are. It's on your own
Great.
terms at that stage.
Brilliant. Okay, so again, one of the key areas, if we move on to the next slide, Sarah, is our pension. And like with everything, we're working for most of our adult life, and we're earning income. But when we stop, we need to replace our income. The big message from, our pension summit this year was adequacy. What is
Mm,
adequate for us in retirement? And again, you see kind of the three benchmarks here would be modest income, which would be 30% of working income, which covers our basic needs, with
yeah,
limited money left over for non-essentials. Moderate, you have a little bit of flexibility, you have a small financial safety net should the unexpected occur. But again, just chipping away, but we're not setting the world on fire in terms of our lifestyle. And then comfortable, the advice is to work towards 70% of our working income, financial freedom, and can afford some luxuries to enjoy our retirement. Um, how do we know what's enough, Michelle?
I think this slide is really interesting, to be honest with you. When I saw this, I suppose how it's mapped out and putting numbers on things. So, look, I think this is an excellent exercise for everybody to do because I suppose when we're trying to put a number, numbers are very hard to kind of pinpoint. So looking at them in a percentages way can make it really useful and it can make it relative, it can make it relevant to an individual when we look at this. But how much money you are going to need really depends on what lifestyle you want to support. Okay. So a really good question to ask yourself is, look, not just what do you want your retirement to look like? What don't you want your retirement to look like? What
Yeah,
position do you not want to find yourself in? And I suppose from that point onwards, we can work backwards. Okay. So when you know what it is you don't want for yourself, we can then start pinpointing a number for you and work backwards to achieve that number. And I
very
think
good.
look,
Yeah,
it's a really useful, honestly, very straightforward way. I suppose some things that can be very straightforward. Like I've heard goals and objectives from people to wanting to go on 5 holidays a year to just wanting to keep the heat on from 9 to 9 in the winter, So
yeah,
it really is an individualized plan for everybody. But I think understanding and knowing, look, this is where I don't want to find myself. And look, some people might be there now, as I said, look, not everybody is going to be at their number now based on their current arrangements. But what we really don't want is to find anybody in a position where we can't achieve that number. And I think that's really important. And I suppose not being able to achieve it purely from a timing point of view,
yeah.
which look, we'll have a look at, I suppose. But that's really what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, and a lot of people on this call here today, Michelle, will have a really solid foundation, within the public sector. So it's
Mm,
look at that, and then have a look and see how far do we, if anything, do we need to grow
yeah,
that number and know your number. I think knowing your
absolutely.
number is the place to start. Okay,
I might
focus.
actually just,
Yeah,
sorry, Ellen, I might note on that. See, on the moderate income piece, I suppose I think that's quite an interesting stat relevant to public sector staff because we often hear that figure, the 50%, the 50% figure, half your salary, half your wages, which is a best case scenario within the public sector. And often we find most people probably aren't in that best case scenario in terms
yes,
of that moderate lifestyle. But I suppose it's a call to just because you may find yourself in that best case scenario doesn't always mean that that's your number. And I
yeah,
suppose a lot of people that kind of rule out the financial planning because they think I'm going to have my 40 years, I'm going to have my full service. I don't need to look at this. Maybe you do. If that 50% is not in line with your lifestyle aspirations, well, then maybe we need to have a look at how we can further enhance that.
Explore your options. Okay,
That's it
brilliant.
exactly.
Cognizant of time, so let's keep this moving, Michelle. So our
No problem.
options then, we've loads of questions in around Rachel from the DAFM as what other options are there to boost pensions. Laura from Denary Coco is asking the benefits of cost attached to buying back years. Buckets and buckets and buckets of
Yeah.
questions around ABCs. What are they? What do they do? Do I need them? Am I suitable? So just walk us through briefly what this slide means.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, so you have a couple of different options. So I said, step one, let's have a look at what you've already got. Step two, then let's have a look at the options if you're not happy with what you've got on in place. What's really important to do is to make the discretion between temporary years, training years, and then notional years of service. So temporary years, training years, these are years that you've spent physically working within the public sector where maybe you went making pension contributions. So
Yeah.
certain occupations will fall into this category a lot more than some others. These years are actually very good value to buy back. And I suppose when you hear of costs associated, is a good value for money. If there's any time spent in that capacity, absolutely the advice would be to explore your options, speak to HR, speak to your superannuation, and get a quote. Okay,
Yeah.
so typically we find it's really good value. Other years of service is purchase of notional years of service, which is probably a lot more typical when you hear people speak about it. And I suppose, look, for anybody on the call today who's ever explored the option or spoken to colleagues who have maybe looked at this option, the big narrative we hear is it can be very expensive. Okay. Now, look, it's again, like anything, it's encouraging to go and have a look, get the information, get the facts before you jump into a decision like this. But what we will do, I suppose, before we make the advice on what way to go down is to see does it represent good value for money? How much is it going to cost you versus how much are you going to get back in real life terms on the other side? And
Yeah.
is that really going to be a good investment of your money over the long term to achieve what it is you want to achieve at retirement? So, look,
There
absolutely,
is,
it's an option
yeah, and there is pros and cons to all of these options.
to both.
And then
Absolutely.
if we move down to the purchase of additional voluntary contributions, I think we have a slide in the next
Yeah,
slide around that, so we'll get into that. And then our last option, as we mentioned earlier, is to do nothing.
absolutely.
And sometimes that's the best advice, Michelle, that we're
Absolutely.
the what we're on track for is adequate. So back to that keyword adequacy in retirement. Okay, so let's talk about ABCs. Loads of questions around that. Rebecca from DCC is asking about, how do I top up my ABCs? Tara from TUSLA, advice around ABCs. Anna from HSC, practical tips, maximise savings, explain ABCs in layman terms.
Yes, absolutely. In layman terms, I love that. So AVCs, they stand for additional voluntary contributions. Sometimes we hear people call them ABCs, but they are AVCs. So that is what the acronym stands for. And essentially, they are a way of saving money into a fund or into a pot that you can then use to top up your income when you retire, to top up your lump sum when you retire, or to do both, depending on how much you have saved. Okay, so they're a really flexible option of building up a sum of money that you can then use to increase your retirement benefits. Okay, and I suppose some of the advantages and I suppose how they work are it's done through your payslip. So as Ellen mentioned earlier on, look, we have a really robust facility through your payslip where it's a really streamlined approach. If you want to facilitate this, it's done at source for you, so you get your tax relief at source, which we'll have a look at now in a moment. There's also full flexibility on how you contribute these in. Okay, so you are in full control. They're a voluntary contribution. You do not have to pay them in, and you get to control how much or how little and in what frequency you actually contribute towards the fund itself. So that really does give you ownership over your own retirement plans and what that pot of money looks like.
Yeah.
Now they're invested, and I suppose we'll speak a little bit about investing later on, but I suppose it's really important that this type of pension arrangement is invested. So when we look at what the big picture is, this is money that you are saving today to spend in some cases 30, 40 years time. Okay.
Yeah.
We all know the value of our money is not going to hold in 30, 40 years time. The whole point is that it's in a plan where at the time that you go to spend it, it's going to buy all of the things you needed to buy when you need to spend that money. Okay. So it's really important that your money is housed in a vehicle that's going to do that for you. And look, as I said, these are public sector endorsed schemes. So they are facilitated, I suppose, on the backing end. These schemes are established over 30 years now. So
Yeah.
look,
Yeah.
they're running a very long time.
Yeah.
But the tax relief, I suppose, if we go on to the next piece here, this is the piece that most people speak about. And I suppose this is why saving for retirement in an ABC or in a pension vehicle is more advantageous than saving in the bank or the credit union. Okay. And this is quite a typical example. This looks at €100 contribution. So if we have a look at the blue bar here, this is you paying €100 from your own money into a pension plan. Assuming you are a higher rate taxpayer, which a lot of people on the call today will be, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not now, through increments with pay increases, at some stage, most of us move into that 40% bracket just with cut-off points at some period within our careers. In this example, revenue will increase that €100 by an additional €67. So they will top that money up for you. at source through your payslip. So instead of you saving €100, which it would be if you were to put it in the bank or the credit union, what now gets invested into your pension pot is €167. And that makes building up these larger funds a lot more doable than maybe people assume it will be, because you are not fronting the full cost of building up these plans. You're getting a lot of help from the tax man, which otherwise that money is going into the pit of nowhere. Look, some of our taxes, they do get something back for us. PAYE, which is the one that we have very few opportunities to reduce. This is an excellent way of making it work a lot harder for you over the long term.
Brilliant. So I suppose, we've Mary O'Reilly, and, she decides, look, I have a serious shortfall here. I want to go at 60. I'm not going to get my 40 years. I actually want more because I want my nice lifestyle. ABC's maybe the solution, sets them up through payroll and starts putting in whatever premium is allowed from a revenue point of view. Okay, so
Absolutely.
let's move on to the next slide. I suppose, again, to keep it women focused, and I suppose the power of starting early. So again, this was a study conducted by Aviva that 65% of working women have never calculated how many paydays are until retirement. Okay, and women on average start their pensions later. They start typically around 35.3 years of age versus men 32.7. Not a huge difference, but they're twice as likely to start saving into their pensions around the age of 50 plus, as opposed to men, which typically start earlier. So again, the power of monies on the markets, that compound effect, growth factor. Talk to us a little bit about that briefly, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I suppose this slide, again, it's a really interesting slide and it highlights one of the most powerful concepts, I think, in all financial planning, be it that we're speaking about money or just time. And it's the value of starting early. And look, as I said, I'm 34 myself, and this is always a good reminder of how valuable those early working years are when it comes to pension planning and the impacts of starting early. And as I said earlier on, it's the little and often. The little and often approach, I suppose, to putting money aside. There's going to be different times in our life where we have the facility and the capabilities to pay money into these plans. And that might be earlier on. I suppose when we don't have children or we don't have the financial burdens of mortgages, they may be our prime opportunities to be able to contribute into a plan like this. We may not always have the opportunity within those middle periods, which is probably why we're seeing a lot of women starting later on in their 50s, when the bulk of the debts are gone, when the kids are through the education costs, the mortgages are coming into its lower periods. So I suppose, look, that's going to have a really huge impact in the final outcome. And I suppose just to explain a little bit about compound interest and how it works, I suppose to keep it in a simple term, compound interest is just your interest earning money. Okay, so let's say, for example, you save €100. Next year, your €100 is worth €110. So it's the following year, you reinvest that money, you're now investing €110. And that is going to inevitably grow over the long period of time. I think what's quite interesting about this slide here is if you actually have a look at the stats and I suppose what it shows and what it assumes, and I'm sure you'll probably agree here, Ellen, it's a relatively modest savings plan. It's 5,000 a year, and it's a 5% growth per annum, which would be relatively modest. I suppose it wouldn't require an awful lot of risk to achieve these returns, but what it does, it makes a really big impact on the results you can see down the line. I suppose just the last point in terms of timing, and I suppose especially with women on this, just to make, is that sometimes when we speak to people and they have the gaps and they have the affordability to plug it in, I like that they might be at that point in their life where now, look, they've got the disposable cash to do so. Often we find there's not enough time to fill all of those gaps. And that can be down to, I suppose, funding rules, which is really important. Because when it comes to the likes of pensions and saving these plans, we are still limited through rules that we have to work within. The revenue put caps on what we can or can't save into these plans. I suppose the longer we leave it, the more we restrict ourselves in terms of what we can actually do to put money and to plan for these pots. So look, while it's never too late, and I will stress that point, never too late to start looking at your pension, the earlier you look at it, I suppose, the greater your options are. I think that's the big resounding message.
That's the key message. It's never too late. And I suppose combine that with, getting the right advice and having the confidence to make those key decisions. Again, cognizant of time, Michelle, so we might just fly through these next couple of slides. This is more around kind of protecting the family. Olivia from the Irish Prison Service is asking what steps does she need to take to protect her family financially. Anne-Marie from the OPW is asking around general advice around pensions. We've lots of questions from single mothers. How do they protect their income as they're kind of sole earners within the house? So we will talk briefly around life cover, income protection, and then move on to our savings goals, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, no problem. So look, I think this is, I suppose, along the points of knowing your pension number is actually knowing your protection needs. And I suppose it's taking a similar approach to it. It's a good starting point. It's just to understand exactly what you've already got. And this is something that we do during a review. So, like many people, they'll have policies through work, they may have cover, but they're not quite sure what's included in that. So, putting a real number on that is important. But
Yeah.
it's also important, I suppose, just on the slide to know what types of cover you have. And I suppose there's different requirements, different needs for different types of cover at any given stage. And that's why we look at the short, the medium, the long term. So, you
Yeah.
might have things like mortgage protection, which the bank make you take out to cover them. But I suppose what they don't ensure is that your family are looked after. And I suppose what we're trying to do when it comes to protection plans is to replace earnings. I suppose your loss of earnings, your capacity to earn, that is your biggest asset over your lifetime while you're working. I suppose for anybody who is financially dependent on that, be it that it's yourself, or be it that you have children, be it that you've got financial obligations or mortgages, again, taking that proactive approach rather than a reactive one to know that, look, all of those ducks are going to be in a row. And I suppose anyone that's dependent on that money coming into the household is going to be looked after in that eventuality if the worst case were to happen. So, look, a comprehensive pension plan will it'll cover a little bit of each of these houses to make sure all these hats are kind of are looked after come retirement, or sorry, come the financial planning approach.
Brilliant. So God forbid we pass away in the morning. Again, back to that same simple message, know your number. Moving on to
Yeah.
income protection, similar enough, Michelle. Lots of queries around this, advice around income protection from Amanda from Tusla. And I asked you from the Department of Justice, long does income protection last? So this is something that would be supported primarily through, your employer, 3 months full
Yeah.
pay, 3 months half pay, typically within the public sector. We find when the problems can start when employees drop to social welfare rated pay, and that's kind of the disparity between what the household cost is
Hmm.
versus what's coming into the house. So again, income protection is a really tax efficient way of topping the income back up to 75% of your salary. But just I suppose to highlight the point that it's quite difficult to get. So
Yeah.
again, like with pension planning, look at it as early as you can when you're in good health, when premiums are more cost effective, but it is supported through tax relief. And very often, Michelle, we always say we insure our phones,
Oh, everything.
we insure our cats and dogs, etc. But our income is the bottom of the pile, but it's actually the most important one that supports everything.
Everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's a much longer term financial support then. I suppose it really puts you in a position that if you are out sick long term, that your energy can be put back into the recovery without the stress of, I suppose, how the boat's going to stay afloat. And I suppose that's the real benefit of having the plans in place.
Yeah, and again, look, these are the stats on, I suppose, particularly women are 27% more likely to claim, and the average age for claims is 42. It's very young, Michelle.
Yeah, no, it's quite stark. And I suppose, look, often as well, what we find if you have a look at where the division of where these claims come from, I think a lot of people, when I speak to about protection plans, you hear the narrative, look, I'm well, I've never been sick, it's not going to happen to me. But
Yeah,
it's the everyday wear and tear. It's not the biggies while they are covered. Generally speaking, it's the stress, the anxiety, the work related issues. It's musculoskeletal, it's your back, it's your neck, it's your legs, it's your joints. The things that keep you out of work long term are the everyday wear and tear. And often what we find is it's women who work in a lot of these industries where the risks are a lot higher of these illnesses. So you've got examples like teachers, nurses, OTs, physios,
yeah.
really demanding positions where I suppose females probably dominate the majority of the sector. I suppose it's no surprise that this is where the claims come from. And again, these are things that you can't always predict. It doesn't necessarily need to be a genetic or a familial history. These are things that I suppose are uncontrollables.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I suppose, before we move on from income protection, when you're sick, financial stress is the last thing you
Yeah.
want to contend with when you're going through something, be it a serious illness or, your more day-to-day issues, but having that financial support is key. But again,
Yeah.
like with everything we've said before, know your number. What is your cost
Hmm.
to keep the household going? Moving on to savings and goals. So Rosemary from the Department of Foreign Affairs is like asking how to build wealth, investing in stocks. Olivia is asking around third level financial advice, college funds. Chelsea from Tusla is asking for tips for saving with mat leave periods. So yeah, I mean, look, we call this our bucket slide, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I spoke a lot about the short, the medium, the long term, and this kind of ties everything back together. And I suppose like anything with your savings, different monies needs to have different houses for different reasons. Okay. And look, there is a place for the bank, there's a place for the post office, there's a place for the credit union. And I suppose it's really just identifying when you plan to spend that money and how much you need it to be worth at the time when you go to spend it. So look, if you're saving for Christmas, if you're saving for a holiday, that money needs to be accessible. But if you're looking at the 5 year, the 7 year, the mortgage planning, the education costs, the down the line, the retirement, we need to have a look at how we're going to make that money work in a way that's going to be suitable for when we go to spend it. And I suppose if we go on to the next slide, it just shows, I suppose, some of the threats, I suppose, and why this has become so topical. And I suppose why we probably see there's so many questions around savings at the moment is because more and more people are looking outside of those traditional options within the banks or the credit union. And I suppose that's just because people are becoming more aware of these threats. These terms won't be a foreign term. Deposit rates being at an all-time low, inflation rates creeping up every single year. I'm sure we all feel the impacts of a bag of shopping in Tesco week to week, and that's only going up. And I suppose that coupled with shrinkflation, which is just, I suppose, what we're actually paying for, what we're getting, and the value for what we're actually paying, which is increasing. It's no surprise that we are looking outside of, I suppose, how do we make this work harder? And I suppose, look, particularly when we're looking at, I suppose, coupling all of these threats with a 5 year, 10 year impact when things are just going up annually, it's not just, I suppose, important that we recognize it. I suppose, not just a good idea. It's vital that we look at investment options to make sure that we're not going to be impacted by these problems.
And that's it, Michelle. And with inflation running at 2%, it doesn't feel like 2%. When you look at your bills, like VHI going up, your home heating bills going up, your pint of milk going up, your cup of coffee going up, it doesn't feel like it's at a low rate of 2%. So moving on, I suppose, Elaine from the Department of Justice. Elaine, it's like you knew we had this slide. She's asking, what's the best place to invest her children's allowance?
Yeah, and then look again. This is find your number, find your appetite, find, I suppose, where you're comfortable. And I suppose risk is something that I think a lot of people shy away from, but it is something that we should embrace. I suppose looking at all of the different threats and all the reasons why we shouldn't keep our money just sitting in the bank for the long term. Again, where you invest is going to be a very individualized process. We'll have a look at what kind of appetite you have for risk, and I suppose looking at something middle of the road there. If we have a look at the high risk, the low risk, the medium risk, leaving your money in the bank or the credit union. We're looking at, what's the period there, Ellen? Sorry, I can't see. Over.
So this is
14-year term, is it?
14-year term. So 2007 to 2024. So, and it's 140 a month. This particular slide reflects a 17-year period, actually, Michelle. Sorry. So and I suppose these are fairly standard funds from Zurich, so not terribly specialised in any which way, but it's the impact of leaving the money sit and grow in the markets and adding on a monthly basis. So again, it's a very powerful slide.
It's that buzzword of the day, I think, compounding. It's just that compounding impacts little tasks often. And I think that's really the way to approach it.
Brilliant. But look, folks, if you do want to find out more about why would you consider investing in the current environment, we do have, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a minute. We have an investment webinar. We're going to go to our fastest fingers first. Okay, so we're going to open up the chat function. So how many extra years do women in Ireland need to work to reach pension parity?
Oh, God, they're flying in. Everybody's so quick.
Flying in already.
Goodness me, Sarah. The one for all is going down well.
Yeah, absolutely. Very popular. Wow, I'm trying to find the first one now. Let me see. Our answer, first of all, answer is 8 years. And our winner then, first person, looks like it's Geraldine Byrne. So well done, Geraldine. We'll get your voucher in the post.
Congratulations. Brilliant. So that is fantastic. So folks, this is our investment webinar, okay, and it's always highly attended every year. It's on Tuesday the 24th of March at 7 p.m. and we have an absolutely wonderful panel. We have our CEO Claire Hanrahan, we have James Forbes from Goodbody Asset Management, he's Head of Investment Solution, and Neil White, our Regional Manager and Senior Financial Planner in Irish Pensions and Finance. So again, the pros and cons of investing, what options do you have? Explore your options. Really, really delighted with the high attendees here today. I hope you got some really key information out of today. What happens next, folks? Book on those QR codes if you want more information. I suppose our key takeaways from today, our big, I suppose, takeaway would be the pension gender gap that would tie in with the gender pay gap. Why is that? Variations in lifetime earnings, differences in typical contribution levels, later average pension start ages for women, career breaks, part-time work, reducing total contributions, loss of compound growth from missing earlier years of saving, and confidence gap that lower financial confidence in decision making. But our solutions, Michelle, find out your number, take action, talk to an advisor, and make your own informative financial decisions. Really lovely to present to you today. Have a lovely afternoon, and hope to see as many of you on the investment webinar as possible. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks,
ladies.
Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.